Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar. We're very excited to have you all logging in right now. It's just about 10 o'clock. There's still some folks logging on, so I'm going to give it about one more minute, and then we will go ahead and get started. All right, good morning, everybody. This is Debbie Rauscher with John Burton Advocates for Youth, and we're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar this morning, Financial Aid Updates for Foster Youth. So I'm really excited to have a great lineup of presenters for this morning's web seminar. As I just said, my name is Debbie Rauscher, and I'm with John Burton Advocates for Youth. We are joined this morning by Pau Camacho with the California Department of Social Services, Gina Brown, who's now with the California Community College Chancellor's Office, Ramona Carlos and Santiago Morales from the California Student Aid Commission, along with Steve Caldwell. And I want to just give a little shout out before we start as well to Jessica from the Foundation for California Community Colleges. This webinar was her brainchild, so thank you to Jessica for bringing this topic to us today. A couple logistical pieces before we get started. The PowerPoint is available in the handout section of your control panel as a PDF. So if you are somebody who likes to be able to print out the PowerPoint and follow along or take notes, or just to download it to have later, that is available as a handout that you can download at any point during the web seminar. In addition, we will be doing question and answer at the end of the webinar, and so if you have questions, you can go ahead and type them in the questions panel at any time, and we will answer all of those questions, or as many as we can get to, at the end of the web seminar. If you have any logistical issues or anything like that, technological issues during the web seminar, you can go ahead and send those through the questions panel as well, and we will do our best to help you out. Finally, a recording of this web seminar as well as the presentation materials will be posted both on the John Burton Advocates for Youth website and the California College Pathways website, and we will be sending out a link to that recording once it's posted to everybody who registered for the webinar today. So I want to just say a couple of words about why we're so focused on the issue of post-secondary education for foster youth. And I think this picture on the screen here, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, really brings home the point of why higher education is so essential in today's economy. So this chart shows how the job market has changed since the Great Recession 10 years ago. You can see that during the recession, there was a huge loss in jobs available to a person with a high school diploma or less. About 5 million jobs were lost. And we have not recovered those jobs, even as the economy as a whole has recovered. There continues to be a net loss of 5.5 million jobs since 2008. In contrast, if you see the blue line on the chart, that is the number of jobs that require a bachelor's degree. There was actually a slight increase in the number of jobs even during the recession. And since the recovery, there has been a net gain of 8.4 million jobs that require a bachelor's degree. For those with an associate's degree, the market has fully recovered, and there's been a net gain of 1.3 million jobs. In total, 99% of the jobs created since the Great Recession require at least some college. And so this is why it is just so crucial and becoming even more so that foster youth have access to post-secondary education. We also know that financial aid makes a huge difference in student success. So there was a study done last year in 2017 of California community college students, and students who received at least $7,500 in financial aid, 49% of them transferred or graduated, whereas students who received between $1,000 and $2,500, only 17% transferred or graduated. So making sure that students, and in particular foster youth who are among some of our most vulnerable, have access to all the financial aid that they may be eligible for is really essential. Unfortunately, we also know that foster youth are missing out on aid. So while 82% of foster youth received the California Promise, only half of those same foster youth are getting a Pell Grant, and only 13% are getting a Cal Grant. And so the legislation that we're going to be talking about today is really designed to start to move the needle and change some of those numbers, making sure that foster youth have access to all the financial aid that they qualify for. So what are the legislative changes that we're going to focus on during this webinar? There's basically 4 bills that we're going to be taking a look at, and our panelists are going to get into a lot more detail about what these bills do and how they're being implemented. But a brief overview: Senate Bill 12, which was passed in 2017, provides for automatic verification of foster care status on the FAFSA. Assembly Bill 1809 expanded eligibility for the Cal Grant for foster youth with a $5.3 million budget allocation. Assembly Bill 1811 expanded the Chafee Grant eligibility for foster youth with a $3.92 million budget allocation. And then Assembly Bill 3089 provides some funding for outreach activities for the California Student Aid Commission, CSAC, and CDSS, the Department of Social Services, to be able to do some outreach to make sure that students are aware of the expanded eligibility, and that included an $80,000 budget allocation. So in total, we've got about $9 million more money this year than we've had in the past available to foster youth for financial aid. We want to make sure that every single penny of that gets into the pockets of students who need it. Before I turn it over to Pao and jump into this, I wanted to give a quick view to folks about what we at John Burton Advocates are looking for next year for 2019, which is, of course, right around the corner. We're planning to continue to work on this issue of financial aid access in 2019. We're really excited to be partnering with Senator Jim Bell, who has agreed to author a bill this year to try to improve access to the Chafee Grant in particular. It will do this through 2 things. One, giving the Student Aid Commission permission to over-award Chafee Grants in the beginning of the year so that more Chafee Grants get out at the beginning of the year rather than being recycled back in and not being available until later in the academic year. And then also changing some of the provisions around satisfactory academic progress to allow students who are not making satisfactory academic progress a little more leeway in being able to keep their Chafee Grants for longer. So we're really excited about this legislation, and I'm sure we'll be doing a webinar next year with a lot more details on how you can get involved, but just wanted to give a little sneak preview. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pao from the Department of Social Services.
Thank you, Debbie. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amparo Camacho, also known as Pao. I work for the Transition Age Youth Policy Unit of the California Department of Social Services. I'm happy to be part of this presentation as I will be focusing on legislative updates, including the Chafee Education and Training Voucher, which I will refer to as ETV. So with that, we will go on to our first slide. First of all, I would like to briefly go over Senate Bill 12. There are 2 main components that I would like to discuss through the passing of SB 12. The first component is that for county social workers where youth who are 16 years or older express interest in pursuing post-secondary education, the documentation of a post-secondary education support person shall be identified in the youth's case plan. So this individual or individuals will assist the youth with applications for post-secondary education and related financial aid. The adult or adults identified may include a child's high school counselor, court-appointed special advocate, guardian, or any other appropriate adults. The second component addresses the barrier of verifying foster care status for foster youth. With the passing of SB 12, the California Department of Social Services and the California Student Aid Commission have created an automated system for verification of foster youth status for federal financial aid. With this data sharing and addressing the recent Cal Grant expansion through Assembly Bill 1809, the Cal Grant eligibility will also be included. So moving on to the next slide. So I would just like to provide a brief background on Chafee ETV. So it started with the Chafee Foster Care Independence Act of 1999, which created the Chafee Foster Care Independence Program that includes specific requirements to identify youth that are likely to remain in foster care until 18 years of age and provide services that will aid in making a successful transition to self-sufficiency. Services include programs and support in areas of education, career exploration, vocational training, job placement, job retention, daily living skills, budgeting and financial management skills, substance abuse prevention, and health activities, including nutrition education. It also includes acquiring skills, education, and assistance to achieve employment, and post-secondary education preparation and support. Additional programs include providing personal and emotional support for youth aging out of care with the encouragement of support from mentors and dedicated adults. It also includes financial, housing, counseling, employment, education, and other appropriate services to former foster youth ages 18 to 21 to assist in the attainment of self-sufficiency and through the acceptance of personal responsibility to transition into adulthood. The Promoting Safe and Stable Families Amendments of 2001 created education and training vouchers available of up to $5,000 to include post-secondary education and training to youth that have aged out of care and have not attained 23 years of age. Vouchers may be used for a variety of services and supports designed to assist an individual in attending and satisfactorily completing post-secondary education or training at an institution of higher education. These may include, but are not limited to, tuition, fees, books, equipment, supplies, uniforms, housing, internships, or school-related travel. The eligibility criteria for Chafee ETV include a youth who was a dependent or ward of the court living in foster care sometime between the ages of 16 to 18, a youth who was placed in out-of-home care by a tribe or tribal organization between the ages of 16 to 18, and under the age of 22 as of July 1st of the award year. The Families First Prevention Act that was enacted on February of this year amended the John H. Chafee Independence Program, which had also changed the name to the John H. Chafee Foster Care Program for Successful Transition to Adulthood, and also made changes to the ETV program to extend eligibility up until their 26th birthday while placing a 5-year limit on the total length of time a youth can receive a voucher. The maximum annual amount of the voucher, $5,000, and its purpose, which is to apply toward the cost of attendance at an institution of higher education, remains unchanged. On the next slide, I will discuss additional Chafee updates. With the passing of Assembly Bill 1811, Section 69519 of the Education Code was amended to expand program age eligibility for former foster youth and additional funding for Chafee ETV. So the new eligibility requirements include to be a current or former foster youth who was a dependent or ward of the court living in foster care between the ages of 16 and 18, or youth who were in kin gap, a non-related legal guardianship, or were adopted, are eligible only if the youth was a dependent or ward of the court living in foster care at some point between the ages of 16 and 18 and have not reached their 26th birthday as of July 1st of the award year and have not participated in the program for more than 5 years, whether or not consecutive. Through the expansion of the program, age eligibility for former foster youth who have not attained 26 years of age, the passing of Assembly Bill 3089 authorizes the California Student Aid Commission and the California Department of Social Services to utilize outreach purposes with this age expansion for this new population. Moving on to the next slide. If you would like to learn more about assisting current and former foster youth in areas of post-secondary education, including Chafee ETV or financial aid in general, and other programs and support services available, or other areas on serving transition-age youth to help them to achieve self-sufficiency, independence, and to successfully transition into adulthood, we would like to extend an invitation to you to our second annual Transition Age Youth Conference with this year's theme, 3 Pillars of Success, Balancing Physical, Mental, and Social Well-Being, which is focused on addressing the whole person aspect of the transition-age youth to promote long-term development and success. This conference is data-driven in a sense that we will address the several remaining challenges of the transition-age youth population in the areas of financial self-sufficiency, educational attainment, adult connections, homelessness, and high-risk outcomes as indicated in our National Youth in Transition Database, also known as NYDID, which is a nationwide initiative that gathers information through surveys to explore and understand the needs of foster youth as they transition out of foster care. Throughout the course of the conference, there will be various learning opportunities for youth, agencies, and community partners that focus on ideas and information about best practices to improve foster youth outcomes. So please join us on February 26, 2019 for our conference. I've included our website link as well as the registration link. So moving on to the next slide. If you have any questions, please contact the Transition Age Youth Policy Unit. I've included our email address as well as our phone number. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over to Steve Caldwell with the California Student Aid Commission.
Good morning. Yes, I'm Steve Caldwell, and I'm going to talk first about SB 12 a little bit more. I know we've talked some about it already, but the bill required the California Student Aid Commission to work with the Department of Social Services to develop a way for financial aid administrators to automatically verify foster youth status for foster youth that were in foster youth as of age 13. It's a little bit different from the Chafee foster youth. So because they're verified as foster youth does not mean they're eligible for Chafee, because they have to be at age 16 to 18 for Chafee. So also, this will be a list later on. Phase 1 right now is just that the students can be looked up individually. Later on, we're working on developing a list so that foster youth can be verified as a list rather than just individually. And access is for the financial aid administrators at the colleges. So they can go onto a screen, which is shown here, and it'll show the foster youth verification for each student. And as long as the student listed that school on their FAFSA or DREAM Act application, they'll be able to verify. Otherwise, to honor the privacy of the foster youth, they won't be able to verify if they didn't list that school. So if a student is interested in a particular campus, they need to make sure that they go back and list that campus on their FAFSA or DREAM Act. And then schools will have to use a previous method for verifying foster youth if they're not on the list, but we are working with the Department of Social Services, and we get a full list, full data set every month. So it should be up to date by month, and we'll continue to do that so that this foster youth verification can work for students and not send them back to the county offices to get verification. So the next slide just shows a little bit more about the process. So the list actual screen return students with your school listed on the FAFSA that were in foster placement at least one day since age 13, and they're under 26 years old, so they would qualify for our 2 programs, or at least 1 program. If the school is not listed on the FAFSA or DREAM Act, verification cannot be confirmed. We talked about that. If the student is not on the CDSS list, verification can't be confirmed. And we will work with students who are not on the CDSS list, and we can try to help them get in contact with DSS, the Department of Social Services, to correct that. In these cases, the school will have to use the alternate method, so they would have to go back, and the student would have to go to the county, but we are working to minimize that, and between us and the Department of Social Services, most students should be covered. And then individual financial aid staff will need to be granted rights to view the screen by their financial aid director. So we only have one person that is granted access on campus, and then others can request access from their financial aid director. The next screen, a little bit more about the just examples of the screens. So in the lookup, we would show, you see the green below that says foster youth verification is confirmed. That means they're on the DSS list and you're all set knowing that they were a foster youth, at least from age 13 and on. And when you go into enter, you'd enter the 8-digit school code, the student's first and last name, the date of birth, and then click verify. And if your school code is on the student's FAFSA or CADA, the California DREAM Act application, and the CDSS data file, the foster youth status is confirmed. The next screen shows when they're not confirmed, and that's when we have to go back and use kind of a manual process to get them confirmed. Hope is that you wouldn't see that very often. So moving on to the next slide, we talk about AB 1811 a little bit more. It does expand the Chafee grant eligibility to students that are up to age 26. Previously, it was only up to age 23. And I know Powell talked about the 5 years limit, which is a federal limit, which is new. And so we have implemented that into our system, and we will notify students if they've reached that 5-year mark. 2018-19 Chafee grant allocation has increased from about $14,333,000 to $17,623,000, and that's great. The expansions to foster youth and the Chafee grant in particular will help a lot more students. So we're glad to be able to accomplish that and work with the legislature to increase those numbers. The allowance for the Department of Social Services and the California Student Aid Commission to newly eligible students is we were able to secure about $80,000 to help with outreach to these students. We're working on a plan with the Department of Social Services to be able to reach those students who are between the 23 and the 26-year-old new limit. So that should help as well. And then Chafee grant expansion, the implementation status, we now are able to receive applications from students between 23 and 26. The full allocation's been awarded. We try to keep that throughout the year, and as students move in and out, so we have some students that maybe decided not to go to school or are currently ineligible, so we'll take those awards and recycle them for others. So just because a student didn't get an award right up front doesn't mean they won't. We'll still work with them. We are updating the priority awarding process to make sure that those 23 to 26-year-old students have a fair share of the money that's coming out in the new awarding. And then we will be sending out continuous operations memos to schools. We've sent one out about the Chafee expansion. We'll send more as new information becomes available. And previously ineligible students have been renewed and notified that their award is able to be renewed. And in progress, we're adding a year's participated flag. So right now it's kind of manual, but you'll be able to see how many years the student has actually participated in Chafee. So if they're at 3 years, that means they have two years left of the 5. So we want to make that as automatic as possible. Okay. Just a slight clarification on SB 12 and the requirements for the WebGrant system. It's the system administrator on campus, not necessarily the financial aid director. I think it could be the financial aid director, but it's actually the system administrator is the correct term for that. So thank you to staff for sending that. Cal Grant B for foster youth, AB 1809. This program will help foster youth, and we want to make sure that it doesn't get confused with Chafee. This is not a Chafee program. This is a foster youth program for any foster youth that are eligible for a Cal Grant B. And with the Cal Grant B awards, they may be renewed for a total of 8 years now under current law. And this was part of the Budget Act of 2018. It allows applications to be submitted as long as the student has not reached their 26th birthday and before July 1st of the award year. And then the application deadline for students attending a community college is extended to September 2nd. It had been March 2nd for students for the entitlement program. So this is a big change for foster youth. It gives them a lot more access. It gives them a lot more time to complete school. And this, remember, the Cal Grant program is for undergraduate studies. So if they already have a bachelor's degree or they're in their postgraduate studies, this Cal Grant would not apply to them. But they have 8 years to finish. So we want to make sure that students know that. We want to make sure that they can apply. It was effective beginning in 2018-19. However, just want to note that we are still in development on this program. It takes quite a while to not only write up the business requirements, which we have submitted to our information technology branch, but for them to get it into our grant delivery system and make it work, it's going to take a little while. So we know that students are calling and asking questions about AB 1809, and we will get it implemented as quickly as possible, but it is taking a little bit of time. Can't give you a definite timeline yet, but that will be coming soon, and we will share that with you in operations memos as soon as we know a little bit more. So right now it's in progress. We're in application development. Then on AB 1809, the next slide. Oh yeah, you got it. Foster youth are defined in foster care after age 13. The eligibility will be verified by the data match with CDSS, with the Department of Social Services, when available. Again, otherwise we have to go back to that manual process, but shouldn't happen very often. The law went into effect on July 1st, 2018, and that's because it was part of the Budget Act, so it became effective right away. Once processes are in place, eligible students will be retroactively awarded. So we'll go back and we'll make sure that those students who were eligible are taken care of. Students who previously used up to 4 years of eligibility can reapply for Cal Grant. So if we know that a student who is a foster youth and has been verified as a foster youth, they can go back and they can get their extra 4 years of eligibility. Students currently receiving, did that one. GPA eligibility would be determined based on the high school GPA, even if already enrolled in college. And this is the way the law was written. So students who want to apply for this, and it is an entitlement program, so if they qualify, they will get the award for Cal Grant B, but they need to be able to get a hold of their high school GPA and submit that. And again, stay tuned. We'll be sending out additional operations memos as this program goes into effect. And now I'll introduce Santiago Morales, who's going to talk about Chafee Grant overview.
Thank you, Steve. So going over the Chafee, this is a brief basic overview. It doesn't go into the details of what how colleges will actually process in the roster, but just go over the overview. Basically, the Chafee Grant, students need to apply and meet the following criteria. And I know we've already gone over this a couple times already, but be a current or former foster youth who was in a dependent award of the court, living in foster care between the ages of 16 and 18. So just to reiterate, the verification tool is great, but cannot be used necessarily to verify Chafee foster youth. Sorry, it's okay. And so it's not necessarily for verifying the Chafee foster youth, because you could have somebody that's verified on the tool that maybe only was in foster care between the ages of 13 and 15, so they necessarily wouldn't be eligible for Chafee. So just keep that in mind when you're using the tool. So youth who were in kin gap or a non-related legal guardianship or were adopted are eligible only if the youth was a dependent or ward of the court living in a foster care between the ages of 16 and 18. They have not have reached their 26th birthday as of July 1st of the award year. For example, a student applying for in February of 2019 for the 1920 academic year cannot be reaching their 26th birthday as of July 1st of 2019. School eligibility. So as of the AB 2506 that was implemented in the 17-18 academic year, award year, this aims to increase the rate of college completion of former foster youth by restricting the use of Chafee funds at schools that meet certain graduation graduation and loan default criteria. So, for example, if the institution is at an eligible participating Cal Grant school, they would be eligible as a Chafee eligible school, or if they're an out-of-state school or some sort of vocational school, that school must meet the 3-year cohort default rate of less than 15.5% and an overall graduation rate greater than 30%. Paid Chafee recipients that were previously received payments at a school that is no longer eligible, but will still be continued to be eligible. We don't want to penalize the student because the school is not eligible anymore. So they would still be eligible to receive their Chafee payments at that school based on 2506, as long as they continue to go to that same institution. On the next slide, the Chafee, going over the flow of how this slide shows the award progress of the typical, if this was a perfect Chafee grant student, as the students change schools, become ineligible, and pick up their checks, the process may go back and forth for the student. So the first step would be the student application process and DSS verification. Next step would be award is based on the priority selection criteria. Student is placed on school roster. School certifies eligibility and requests payment. Payment is sent to the school. There's a second eligibility check and disbursement by the school. And then the schools can go into the institutional reconciliation screen just to account for the checks either they still have on hand or have already processed. So Chafee processing normally happens once per week on Mondays. Unless there's a holiday, then it'll get processed the following night, typically normally on the Tuesday. On the next slide, kind of going over the flow again, the Chafee grant application is done one time only, so they don't have to constantly be renewing that application or doing that every academic year. So it's done one time only. They do have to do the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act application every year. So a student would complete the Chafee, the FAFSA, again, if they, to make sure that they want to get processed for the Chafee grant. And once we receive the application for foster care eligibility we receive the verifications from DSS, from Department of Social Services, directly from them on a monthly basis. So hopefully we have the most updated information on there. Now, the March 2nd deadline does not apply to Chafee eligibility. However, it is highly recommended that students apply before the March 2nd deadline to maximize the aid. So as I work with a lot of the Chafee students, one of the things that I notice is that a lot of students that are Chafee eligible miss the March 2nd deadline or September 2nd deadline and miss out on possible Cal Grant aid. So we just want to make sure that we reiterate they want to make sure as October 1st comes around when they can do the FAFSA, that they also get in all the other requirements for the Cal Grant if they need to turn in GPA or they do their application on the time. On the next slide, we go over the priority awarding criteria. So students are awarded by application receive date and based on the established awarding criteria. So the paid renewals are the first students that get picked up. Then it'd be new and non-paid renewal students who will be 25 years as of July 1st of the award year. So basically students that are close to being aged out. New and non-paid renewal students who have dependents, new and non-paid renewal students with an unmet need greater than 5,000, new and non-paid students with an unmet need less than 5,000. So on the next slide, based when schools go into the roster, there's different statuses for each student. So either they're going to show up as awarded, meaning that the school can at that point go ahead and request a payment, or the student will be pending, meaning that they're waiting in that priority selection process to be awarded. So students are eligible but not awarded. The student may be on the lower priority of the selection process, waiting to become an awarded student, or there's already a pending transaction that will be processed that Monday evening. So if a school goes in there, they have an awarded student, and they request a payment, that student status will change to pending till the following Monday night. Once it's processed, then it'll go back to the awarded status. The other status that will be shown will be not awarded, meaning that the student was made not eligible by the school. On the next slide, we go over the certify and request a payment by the school. So to maximize funding, it is very important that the schools certify eligibility and request a payment timely. Schools must certify eligibility and request payments each term. Schools can certify and request payment in the same transaction, but there can only be one transaction per week. So it's just when schools are working their payment roster, they have an option of updating the annual data section, which goes over their cost of attendance, unmet need, and all that. If they process that transaction without requesting the payment, they'll have to wait for the following week to request the payment. So it can delay. So I always recommend that schools just do everything all at once and then continue requesting the payment that way once the student is awarded. On the next slide, we go over the certify and requesting the payment. Before the schools can request the payment, students' eligibility must be certified. So students must be enrolled at least half-time, be in good standing with the school, so meeting satisfactory academic progress, have an unmet need. The students do not need to have a high school diploma or equivalent. They do not need to meet selective service requirements or need to be clear of any defaults or overpayments. On the next slide, just as important to requesting a payment is to let us know if a student is not eligible. So it's very important that schools let us know, because if a student's not eligible, they're not enrolled at that school, then we can go ahead and recycle the funds to award the next student in line. So the school would select the most appropriate box, whether they're not enrolled, not meeting SAP, not enrolled half-time. So they would check the appropriate box so that we can go ahead and recycle the award. If the award sits there for more than 30 days, then we will go ahead and us here at CSAC will go ahead and mark the student ineligible so that we can recycle the award. If the student needs to become eligible again, if the student does become enrolled, then the school would need to go in there, uncheck the box that says not enrolled to put them back into the awarding process. On the next slide, we go over the payment request. So payments are sent directly to the, after we request a payment to the state controller's office, we do that on a weekly basis. The checks are sent directly to the school. Checks are made out to the student, but sent to the school. That usual process takes about, after the school has requested a payment, we send the file over to the state controller's office. They create the check, send it to the schools. It's about 2 to 3 week process from that point. Once the check is received, the school must verify that the student is still enrolled at least half-time, is meeting the SAP policy, has the unmet need greater than the amount of the check. So schools are expected to disperse the check within 10 days of receipt or return it to CSAC. So this is one of the biggest challenges that we have, where sometimes the schools will hold on to the checks a lot longer, sometimes months at a time. So we do ask that if the student is not eligible anymore for the check, send that back to us so that, again, we can recycle those funds to award even more foster youth, Chafee eligible foster youth in the future. So it's very, very important that the schools, return the checks in a timely manner, again, and try to disperse the check within 10 days. If the student is no longer eligible for the Chafee grant, schools must return the check. Again, just to reiterate, it needs to be returned in a timely manner. On the check, the schools are able to indicate the reason for return, and the schools are expected to disperse the check within 10 days. So schools are encouraged to utilize the institution reconciliation screen. That just helps them keep track of the checks, if it was dispersed or not. It gives them a good idea what checks they still have on hand, or if it's been received after they've requested it. So it's a great tool to use. So that is available to all the financial aid officers. On the next screen, there's a Chafee grant program update on here, where it kind of gives you a good indication of what we're at so far as of December 3rd. These are our numbers for how much we've awarded, how many awards we've issued out, and how much we've paid year to date. As you can see, the largest segment, if you look at the graph here, that the community college has a big portion of the foster youth. So it kind of gives you an idea of what our biggest who can impact us the most in regards to the Chafee Foster Youth Grant, and how much we need to work closely with the community colleges to make sure that we are able to help as many students as possible. Right now, we're actually, colleges are able to certify for the fall, winter, and spring, although the spring payments aren't issued out till most likely later on in January, but schools can go in there and certify right now for fall, winter, and spring. Any unpaid students that have been on any roster longer, again, more than 30 days, will be made ineligible. If a student regains eligibility, they'll be reconsidered for the award in the current award year. Again, the winter term opened up November 12th. Spring term opened up December 5th. So we want to make sure that we award as many students as possible. On the next slide, it kind of goes over our operational updates, what we do on a weekly basis. We do communicate with the students and also with the schools, advising them that they have students on their rosters that are waiting to be awarded. We do that on a weekly basis. We also email the students, advising them that their award will be recycled at a certain date if the school does not request a payment for them. So we reach out to the schools and to the students to make sure that we are awarding as much as possible on a weekly basis. And then on the next slide, it kind of goes over our contacts and resources. You could always give us a call through our student support line. There's usually a Chafee analyst available to speak to, or our student support reps are available as well. You could also email us with any questions. And there's our website for the chafee.csac.ca.gov that goes over the awarding process and goes over some of the information I've gone over on these slides. So please feel free to get back to us with any questions that you have in regards to the Chafee program. And then I guess right now I'll turn it over back to Debbie.
Great, thank you guys, everybody, so much for all the great information. We have a lot of questions coming in, so that's great. We've got a good amount of time left for questions, so if you do have questions, feel free to go ahead and type them into your control panel and send them over. And I'm going to just start going through these, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. On the screen there is my contact information, and so if you do have any follow-up questions that we don't get to, you can feel free to reach out to me. So I'm going to start. The first question is, and I think you addressed this subsequently in the presentation, but I'll ask it anyway. Will SB 12 provide verification for foster youth ages 13 to 16, or will the verification start at 16? So maybe if somebody from CSAC wants to just reiterate once again, what is the SB 12 age parameters for the SB 12 verification?
So Debbie, the age parameter again starts at 13 all the way through 26. The only thing, again, you can't use this for Chafee necessarily because the students may not have been in foster care between the ages of 16 and 18. So you may have had a student that was in foster care between the ages of 13 and 15. So you wouldn't want to use the tool to verify for Chafee eligibility.
Great. Just to clarify, if somebody submits a Chafee application, the existing verification process for those students will continue to be in place, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The next question is, does a youth need to self-identify as a foster youth on the FAFSA in order to trigger the state database search and match for SB 12? So do they need to answer yes to the foster youth question?
They don't need to answer yes. It's helpful if they do because that'll help them identify other programs that might be available to them. But the list we get from the Department of Social Services, the data set, includes all of the students that were in foster youth between 13 and up. So they would not have to list it on a FAFSA and we would still get their record.
Great. But if they didn't list it on the FAFSA, they wouldn't qualify for independent status. They would have to update that information, correct?
That could happen, and they could work through their schools as well to get the independence, but I think they would have them go back and change the FAFSA. And again, really, we don't want students to limit themselves, so we want to make sure that they do put that information on the FAFSA whenever possible, or the DMAC application.
Right. So the next question, Pal, this might be a question for you. Does in foster care, for the purposes of the FAFSA, include youth in family maintenance, or is it only those who are in an out-of-home placement?
Hi, so that it would only include out-of-home placement.
Okay, great, thank you. So then there's just a clarifying question about who is doing the foster youth verification, whether this is something that's on the WebGrant screen at the college or available to the high school.
It's available on the WebGrant screen for the college financial aid administrators, not for high school.
Great. We then have a question about how a financial aid member get access to this verification screen. Can you say a bit more sort of specific what administrator needs to do in grant particular for access to the screen?
So you were cutting out just a little bit. I think the question was how financial aid administrators would gain access to the screen.
Correct. Just give detail on what that process and just give a user to the screen.
Okay. At each campus, the system administrator would have access to the WebGrant screens, and they would be able to have access to the foster youth verification screen. Now, if other members of the campus financial aid office would like to have access, they need to get that access through their financial aid their WebGrant system administrator. I'm sorry.
Great. Okay. Sorry, let me just get to the next question. how will students identify themselves as a foster youth for the purposes of getting the 8 years worth of time?
So I think the question is, how would foster youth identify themselves as foster youth to get the 8 years for Cal Grant B expansion? Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So we would use the automatic screen, WebGrant screen that shows them as verified as a foster youth. And then we also have that data, of course, in our system. That's where the screen comes from. So we would use that to identify them as foster youth. But for the student to actually identify themselves, it's best if they put that on their financial aid application, and then we go from there. And if they are not, then they would need to actually go get the signed paperwork from the county to verify their foster youth.
Great. So the next question is, somebody wanted to clarify, when you were talking about some status as not awarded grants, is that status only by a school determining the student is ineligible?
So, sorry you're cutting out, Debbie, but you're asking about the status for not awarded for Chafee, correct?
Yeah,
what
sorry,
happens?
I'm not sure what the problem with my sound, but
No problem. So if the school marks
so the question is, does not awarded in WebGrant, is that caused only by a school deciding that a student is eligible?
That can only be caused either by the school marking them ineligible, or if we recycle the award, like if the award has been pending for more than 30 days, we'll mark the student ineligible, and then the following week they'll show up as not awarded. Or if the school marks them as not eligible based on not meeting SAP or not enrolled half-time, that would change them to not awarded. Initially, students are either come up as either awarded or they come up as eligible, not awarded. So again, the only way they show up as not awarded is if something was initiated by either the school or by CSAC. But that can be changed by simply unchecking the box in the payment roster and unchecking for example, if they were marked not enrolled previously, but they all of a sudden show up on the roster that they are enrolled, then they would just uncheck the box. Or if they are meeting SAP or went through some appeal process at the school, they would uncheck the appropriate box, and then the student would be thrown back into the awarding process. And then they'd go into a pending status until they're finally awarded. And then once awarded, then they'd go through the process of the school requesting a payment and follow the awarding process from there.
Great. So the next question is, should a school wait until the census date to certify enrollment status?
That's going to be up to the school's policy on how they want to, either disperse. They can always request it, and then request the payment. Once the check arrives, they would have to follow their own school's disbursement policy in regards to that.
Great. Okay, one question here, just to clarify. Students first time doing a Chafee grant. So question is, once a student has completed a Chafee application, they do not need to do another Chafee application for their second year as long as the FAFSA is completed, correct?
That's correct. So the Chafee application is done once in a lifetime. So it's only done once and that's it. So there's some students that keep trying to do it, and then the system will tell them you already have a Chafee application on file. So again, they only have to do it once. The FAFSA or the DREAM Act needs to be done on a yearly basis.
Right.
And again, on the FAFSA and DREAM Act, we just encourage students to make sure each year they do it by March 2nd so they can get as much financial aid as possible.
And then there's the second part to this question. The person wants to clarify, does the Chafee grant application have to be completed before March 2nd?
The Chafee application doesn't have to be completed by March 2nd. what we encourage is that the FAFSA or the DREAM Act be completed before March 2nd, just because we don't want them to miss out on any Cal grants or any other aid. It's also important to remember that a lot of our Chafee foster youth, some of them are going to out-of-state schools that have their own deadlines as well. So we want to make sure that they're meeting, I know California has one of the earliest deadlines, so if they can meet the March 2nd deadline, they're pretty much going to hit every other deadline in terms of making sure they have their FAFSA in. But the Chafee application can be done at a later date, but the only thing that does is that they won't be considered for an award until we get that Chafee application in. So we always encourage them to try to do that, as quickly as possible, because it only takes a few minutes to do.
Great. The next question is, if a student defaulted on a Title IV student loan, are they still eligible for Chafee?
Yes, they're still eligible for Chafee.
Next question is, what happens if a student is attending multiple schools? For example, they're taking classes at 2 different community colleges. Can they receive a Chafee disbursement?
So on the Chafee side, they would list the school that they're going to be going to. They have to be at least attending at least half time. So, they could be going to multiple schools, but it'd be up to the student to display the one school they want their Chafee grant to go to. Currently, right now, we can't have multiple schools and have checks being sent to different schools. So they'd have to just pick one school that they want their Chafee check going to. And, I have seen students that go to one community college where they're taking 6 units, another community college are taking 3, so you'd want it to go to the one that you're at least attending more than half time. So that's what we always encourage students to do. List a school that you're attending more at. Taking more.
Hi, Debbie. This is Gina Brown. Can I provide a little more clarification on that question?
Yes, please.
So many schools, especially community colleges within the same district, have consortium agreements. So if a student is attending 2 schools, let's say in the same community college district, and there is that agreement, the schools do have the ability to pay for the units at each school. So for example, if they're going to school A for 3 units and school B for 3 units, the paying school does have the discretion to go ahead and make the student eligible for the Chafee grant. Also, I just wanted to provide a little more clarification as well on the question about the census date. Schools are not required to wait until the census date to verify Chafee eligibility. In fact, we encourage schools to do it as soon as possible because we have found that many times a student will drop if they have not received their Chafee early in the semester. So I just wanted to provide that little bit of clarification.
Great, thank you. So I think we kind of already addressed this, but I'll just clarify it once more. If a student has a pending status and does not receive the grant during a particular year, do they need to fill out another Chafee application the next year, or as long as they were determined eligible, that Chafee application carries over to the next year, whether or not they were paid?
Right, whether or not they were paid or not, the Chafee application is done once in a lifetime. They won't have to do it again, and it will carry over year after year.
Great. If a student withdraws from courses before the end of semester, what are the repercussions for their Chafee grant?
Well, as it stands,
I can answer that one. You said if a student withdraws before the end of the semester, the repercussions? The only repercussions would be, in regard to Chafee, there aren't any, but it could affect the student's satisfactory academic progress standing with the school. But specifically for Chafee, there aren't any.
Great. Okay, there's a question here. Can a student complete the FAFSA as an independent student if they are currently in foster care?
The answer to that question is yes, because the FAFSA asks, were or are you currently in foster care? So the student would answer yes, and that would automatically make them an independent student.
Great. Somebody wrote in wanting to clarify about the response for what foster youth means, whether that just means those in out-of-home placement. So Pao, I believe your answer to that was yes, you must be in out-of-home placement.
Yes. Out-of-home placement. Correct.
Great. Somebody wants to clarify for the Cal Grant changes, when you said that a foster youth can now receive 8 years worth of Cal Grant B awards. That, is it 8? Well, the question is, do they only get the max 400%? But I believe it's actually 800%. So if they're going part-time, it would be sort of the full-time equivalent of 8 years. But can you just clarify if that's correct?
Yes, that is our understanding as well, that they get 8 years of full-time equivalent studies for the Cal Grant B only.
So there's a question, I'll go ahead and take this one. How are students being prompted to complete the Chafee application? Is that something high school counselors should be promoting that they do? And I'm going to answer that and say, yes, absolutely. If you are working at a high school and you're a high school counselor, definitely high school counselors should be identifying who their foster youth are and helping them to make sure that they're getting the Chafee Grant application done, as well as the FAFSA. And we at John Burton Advocates for Youth have been working very closely with the Foster Youth Services coordinating programs within County Offices of Education to help them to communicate that expectation to the high schools. So absolutely, that should be happening. So here's an interesting question. If there is a student who is in foster care under the jurisdiction of California at or after age 13, but the family currently lives out of state, are they eligible for a Cal Grant? Do we know the answer to that question at this point?
Hi, Debbie. I think the answer to that question will be, it all determines on, or depends on how the school determines the student's residency. And we all know schools have the different segments have way of determining in-state residency, so it will be based on that.
Great. If a student is ineligible for a Cal Grant due to their high school GPA, can they be considered again after completing 1 year of college if they've raised their GPA at college?
So Debbie, that question is referring to AB 1809, and if I am correct in what hearing, it is based on their high school GPA.
Okay, great. Okay, so here's a question. During a previous presentation by CSAC, it was mentioned that re-verification of eligibility for a Chafee check was not required when the school receives the check. Basically, if the student was eligible when the check was requested, then it should be dispersed when it was received. You do not need to re-verify that the student is still eligible. It sounds like that maybe is not accurate, what this person is thinking is the case. So can you clarify, does the student have to be re-verified when the check was requested if they were verified when the check was, when the check is received, if they were already verified when the check was requested?
Basically, as it stands right now, there is a second verification in place. So the school does need to, when they receive the check, double check that there's still an unmet need, because there may have been additional grant or another scholarship or some other institutional aid that may have come in place that may have changed the unmet need. So there is a second verification in place. Now, I know there's been discussion about possibly getting rid of the second verification check when the colleges receive the check. But again, that's still something that we're still looking into. But as of right now, there is that second verification check that needs to be reviewed by this colleges when a check's received.
Great. So another clarifying question, so I believe it was mentioned that if a student has a default or overpayment, they're still eligible for Chafee. Is this correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Another clarification on a question that was already answered, but just to clarify again, the verification tool for SB 12 is not linked to the FAFSA. So if a student completes, I'm sorry, this is actually a different question. Okay, so the question is, if a student does not complete the FAFSA, will they still be able to be verified through WebGrant as a foster youth?
No, we would need a FAFSA or DREAM Act application on file to even have a record for them. So if they don't have a record, they wouldn't show up on our foster youth verification screen. And in order to, the FAFSA would also identify the school, so the school wouldn't be able to look at it if the student wasn't listed on the FAFSA or DREAM Act. So no, they would not be able to be verified that way unless they file the FAFSA or DREAM Act.
Okay. Next question is, when do you recommend that a student complete and submit the Chafee application? Should they be doing this during their senior year of high school?
Yes, during the senior year of high school is when they should be doing it for the following academic year that they'll be attending college. So, for example, if you have a senior right now, they're going to be completing the 1920 Chafee application.
Great. Next question, if a student already has a BA degree, can he or she be qualified for a Chafee grant?
Yes, they can.
Next question.
Sorry, Debbie, let me just expand on
Sure.
that. So as long as they haven't reached over 5 payments for the Chafee, 5 years.
Over 5 years.
5 academic years of getting paid, yeah.
Next question, if a student is attending community college during their first year for free, I assume that means they're getting a Promise grant, can they still receive a Chafee grant?
Yes, they can. As long as they have enough unmet need.
Next question, so the WebGrant's foster youth verification tool, is this designed to satisfy the required federal verification of FAFSA? Do they no longer need to request documentation if the student is flagged for that to be verified?
No, it doesn't verify anything for the FAFSA. It just verifies that they're a foster youth. So it doesn't change anything for the federal requirements.
But does it verify them for independent status on the FAFSA? That's the purpose of it, correct?
Yeah, so if a student shows up on SB 12 verification, then yes, that satisfies the federal requirement. There is no true requirement, but it does satisfy the independent status for the student.
Great.
Yeah, I think I misunderstood that question. So yes, the campus would know that they were a foster youth and should be considered independent.
So a clarifying question about withdrawal. If a student withdraws before the end of the term and the Chafee check comes after the student has withdrawn, can the student still receive the Chafee check?
They can receive the Chafee check, but again, it's going to be up to the school's disbursement policy that they need to work with the school in terms of if, because you have to look at every school may have a different census date or may view it differently. So it's up to the school disbursement policy in regards to if they're still eligible to receive that check.
So I'm going to take this next question. The question is, are there any efforts to change the GPA eligibility requirement as we foster youth who GPA in high school for various reasons? So this is something we can talk about internally at John Burton Institute. I don't think that we're going to take on GPA requirement for the Pell Grant, but we might take this question whether or not a student qualifies if they've subsequently college and had the GPA, if they meet in college. That's legislation is currently, but something that we can get for the future to see anything worth addressing. So I apologize. Somebody just said I keep breaking up. I'm not sure why. I'm going to do my best to talk straight into. How do you need to discuss about making Chafee available via electronic funds transfer in the future?
So could you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Has there been any discussion about making Chafee available through electronic funds transfer in the future?
Yeah, we're looking at that option right now. The Student Aid Commission is.
Great. Okay, here's a question. I have a student who put their grant B on hold because she is ready to transfer to university and she used years of. With the expansion, can we to use the extra year at community college since she is now eligible for an additional 6 years once she transfers to a year?
I don't think we got that whole question. There was a couple gaps in there. Could you repeat that?
Yes. So the question is, who is currently in community college, has 2 years of Cal Grant already in community college. If we could put her Cal Grant on hold, she's not ready to transfer yet to a 4-year and she wants to save her Cal Grant. With this expansion, can she be, she doesn't have to put it on hold. She can use the year of Cal Grant at the community college, but still have the finding once she transfers.
And just to clarify, this expansion only applies to the Cal Grant B program. So if we're talking about Cal Grant B, she could use the additional time at the community college and then still have enough to transfer to the 4-year. I think that was the question.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, as long as she retains her eligibility and her financial need for Cal Grant B, then she would be able to use it for up to 8 years as a foster youth.
Great. So the next question, Hal, this might be a question for you. Probation foster youth is going to identify the same manner as dependent foster youth for this WebGrant verification.
Yes, probation are also included.
Great. Just looking if we have any more questions to answer. I can throw a question. There's a question, what are recommended best practices for helping former foster students attain their proof of non-filing letter from the IRS? And I'm going to address this because I know this has been a big challenge when students are flagged for verification. If they didn't file taxes, they have this non-filing letter. On the John Burton Advocates for Youth website, a whole information sheet about how to assist students with this. So I will send that out to everybody who is on the webinar, additional information about that proof of non-filing status. So hopefully people are able to hear that response. I'm not sure what this question means, but I'm gonna ask it and see if one of you all at CSAC knows the answer to this question. It says, going back to the question about Cal Grant B eligibility for up to 8 years, does this only apply to students receiving E1s or also to E2 Cal Grants? And maybe if anybody knows what that means, can answer the question and explain what E1 and E2 are.
Hi. So this kind of relates to a question that we had earlier regarding high school GPA and community college GPA. So E1 and E2 are terms that are used within CSAC and in the school financial aid offices as well. So we have the high school entitlement, which is what the AB 1809 is, and so that uses high school GPA only, right? E2 would be our transfer entitlement. So a former foster youth could still be eligible for a transfer entitlement Cal Grant. It's just that they would no longer have the 8 years time frame, right? So community college GPAs can be used, but only for transfer entitlement. I don't know if that answers that person's question, but it is possible.
Great, thank you. Somebody wants to know how they can access the PowerPoint after the call is over. So I will be sending this out to everybody who registered for the webinar. You can also download it from the control panel that's on your screen currently. So Pal, here's a question for you. Does ward of the court only refer to use adjudged wards by the juvenile court? What about wards of the probate court placed under relative guardianship?
Yeah, so if you look back to the eligibility criteria, they would have to be dependent of the court. So that's through the dependency system, which is not part of probate court.
Great. A couple of people have asked if there's any way for us to write up all these FAQs and send them out. I will look into whether that is feasible. We will have a recording of this, however, so you can definitely listen to all of these Q&As again. So the next question, after verifying if a student was in foster care on WebGrants, what does the financial aid administrator need to do? I'm assuming that's going to depend on the policies of the individual campus, but does one of you from CSAC want to try to answer that question?
I can say that one. So Debbie, you said the question was, what does the financial aid office need to do after verification of foster youth status?
Correct.
So they would go through their normal process of how they award financial aid, but keeping in mind that Chafee students do not have to have the ability to benefit. They can be in default or overpayment. So those are the few things. So they would still go through their normal process, but recognizing that Chafee does have their requirements are a little different than, say, Pell Grant or the Cal Grant. And then once they've done their internal work, as long as they go to their roster to request payment, and that would be the final step to get the Chafee payment for that current semester. And then for the next semester or term, they need to go and request the payment once again.
Great. So next question is, if there is a high school student who is dually enrolled in community college courses in at least 6 units, are they eligible for a Chafee grant before they have graduated from high school? Did you hear the question?
So the student, they have to be getting, they cannot still be in high school to get the Chafee grant.
Okay, great. So this is a question sort of for the future in regards to AB 1809. Will Cal Grant B Foster Youth Awards have a unique code assigned to them, like entitlements or competitive awards, or would these students just have a max eligibility of 800% instead of 400%?
I think that's part of our business requirements. We are looking at how to identify those students within the system and treat them differently than regular entitlement students. So that's still in development, and I think there will be something identifying, but we're not sure what that will look like.
Great. So the next question is, if the school selected for Chafee changes, I'm assuming this is the first, Chafee is based on the first school, I think, that's identified on the FAFSA. So if that's not the correct school, how does somebody go about changing the school to make sure that the Chafee is going to the correct place?
So the student should have a WebGrants for Students account where they can log in and actually make the school change, or they could give us a call so that we can, do it over the phone as an option as well. So they would need to notify us if that's not the correct school. But we always encourage students to create a WebGrants for Students account, keep checking their status, not just for Cal Grant, but they can also check on their status for Chafee as well, where they're at in the whole process of receiving their award.
Great. There's a question, this is another clarifying question. Was it said that probation youth are viewed the same under the Chafee and new Cal Grant B guidelines? So a probation youth who is an out-of-home placement, in other words, who qualifies for all the same benefits that a foster youth qualifies for, how are they treated exactly the same under both Chafee and the new Cal Grant B guidelines?
Yeah, so as long as they meet the eligibility criteria, even if they were in probation.
Great. And then another clarifying question on that, are you referring to dual status students, or are you referring to wards of the court without placement orders who qualify as foster youth under Ed Code 48853.5A, so that we know what that is? But can you just sort of clarify a little bit that the probation, who under probation qualifies?
Yeah, so as long as they meet the criteria that they were in an out-of-home placement, at least for a day between the ages of 16 to 18, they would meet the criteria.
Great. Next question. So somebody wants to follow up on the question about, it was just said that if you're currently enrolled in high school and dually enrolled in a community college course, you're not eligible for Chafee. Somebody just asked the question, I thought you did not need to have a high school diploma to be eligible for Chafee. So I believe that the distinction here is having a diploma versus being currently enrolled in high school. But can you just clarify that?
That is correct. You do not have to have a high school diploma to get Chafee, but high school students are not eligible for the Chafee grant.
Great. All right. I think a couple of folks have sent in some very specific questions about things that they're seeing on WebGrants for particular students. I would recommend that you reach out to CSAC to get that clarification. I'm going to go share the screen here with the fee contacts. Also, if you go on the CSAC website, they have all the information there about how to get support. And so if we didn't get to your question, but you have a very specific question about a particular student, I definitely encourage you to reach out to CSAC. So that is all we have time for. So lots of great questions. Thank you all for being on the webinar and staying engaged. Thank you so much to our panelists. This is just incredibly exciting, the opportunities that we now have for foster youth to maximize their financial aid. So feel free to reach out to any of us if you have additional questions, and we will do our best to get back to you. And that concludes this morning's web seminar.